Welcome back, everyone. I thought I would give a quick follow-up video about this fiery red 4,500 pound winch that I reviewed like a week or two ago. As you could see from the start of the video, been doing lots of snow plowing with this. And from my experience, snow plowing with one of these ATV winches is one of the hardest things on a winch. You're constantly up and down. It's really hard on the solenoid, operating that thing back and forth all the time. And here, a couple weeks ago, we had almost 2 feet of snow. You know, it just kept coming down and kept coming down. So it was day in and day out of plowing snow. This last week has calmed down some, but the last few days it was very wet snow. And that's really hard on, well, it's hard on the machine, and it's really hard on the winches too. Pushing that heavy snow and lifting it at the same time as it's under load, trying to push it up into piles, really hard on the winches. The old worn 2,500 pound winch, that winch always got fairly warm when I was doing those snow plowing operations. It would actually, if snow got on it, it would just let off steam. It was so warm. This winch has not done that at all. It has not got warm. The solenoid has stayed cool. So far, I'm pretty impressed with this winch, especially for the price point, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. I want to address a couple things that, if you haven't seen that video, I kind of went through the whole installation and everything of that winch. It took a long time to get that winch installed. Part of that was my fault. And I want to go over a few things I touched in that video. One was the wire length. For 95+% of you folks, if you buy this winch, the factory wiring is going to work fine. It just so happened that on this particular machine where I wanted the solenoid mounted, where the old one was mounted, that the wiring just wasn't quite long enough to do it. For most people, that's not going to be a problem. I'm sure you can find a spot to mount that solenoid controller up closer to the winch, and it shouldn't be a problem. The other issue I had was the bolts. Now, had I used their mount that they had sent, the bolts might have been long enough, because this is a little thinner than the mount I already had on the machine, but I didn't want to refabricate a mount for this mount, so I just bolted, like most winches on these kind of machines, just to that factory mount. And I still don't know if the bolts would have been quite long enough to go through the fair lead, this, and the winch. You might have got a few threads on there, but I wouldn't have been super comfortable with it. So their mount probably would have worked with their bolts. So I just wanted to clear that up. So what else? The rope, going in and out, snow plowing, that constant rubbing in and out on the fair lead on these is usually pretty hard on winch ropes. This rope has shown very little wear. All the snow plowing I've been plowing other people's driveways as well as ours. I've been hauling it into town and plowing some driveways. This thing, it's been through a lot of abuse the last couple weeks, and it's really shown no sign of wear. So the rope, I was a little worried about it at first, but it's holding up just fine. I do suggest, if you get one of these, to run the rope all the way out and check how it's attached to the drum. On this one, I think it should have had a ball or a knot or a melted spot on the end of the rope, so it couldn't pull back through. Go back and watch that other video and you'll see what I'm talking about. Other than that, I have had no issues with the rope since that little fiasco of pulling it out. Like I said, I just don't think it was, either the set screw wasn't in real well, or it didn't have a melted spot on the backside like what I did, or something to keep that from pulling through. I don't expect to ever have any more problem with it after the little fix that I did. It wasn't that hard to do. The hardest part was getting the plate off to get in there to do it. So let's see what else. The switch. I still don't like the switch. I took this off. I used it for a few days snow plowing. It's fairly stiff, which might be a good thing. It's got some nice guards on it so you don't accidentally push it. But I didn't like this switch that much. So I wired in the one that I've had on the machine for, well, nearly 20 years now, that came with the worn, and I'm going to use that because it fits. It's in a nice spot. It's right where your left thumb would be on the handlebar. So that's what I'm using. I just wired it in. It wasn't a big deal to do. So I'm not using the factory switch. It's perfectly serviceable For most people, if you're not running a snowplow in and out all the time, you could probably get by with that just fine and never care. The other thing is, if you're close to the machine, the wireless controller does work fairly well. I've used the heck out of this since that video, running the rope out and then pulling it back in. You know, if you're out by yourself, that's one of the real drawbacks to a lot of winches, is if you're by yourself, they're hard to get the thing back on the drum nicely, because you're trying to reach up and operate it on the handlebars and hold that cable. And if you've got steel cable, it's even worse. Well, with this rope, I can stand out here about 25 feet and hold the button and just let it feed through my hand and feed it nice and even into the drum. Steel, if you happen to put steel cable on one of these, it's the same thing, but I really suggest you wear gloves, and thick gloves at that, because I've wore gloves with steel cable and got metal strands right into my hand, right through the gloves. So, but with the synthetic rope, it shouldn't really be a problem. So this thing has turned out to be very handy. I'm going to find a spot on the machine to put this. The only thing about it is if you get out past about 30 feet, it gets a little glitchy. It works, but it's not a continuous pull. It pulses. So just keep that in mind. But for reeling this rope back in, it's been invaluable to do that. So I'm really quite happy with this winch. When I first installed it, I was kind of grumbling about it a little bit, but since I've been using the heck out of it, I really like it. It doesn't get warm. It's not failed at all through all the snow plowing. There for days on end. It's worked flawlessly. Now let's talk about the price point. This winch, I just looked on Amazon. It's under $200. A couple weeks ago it was like $195. I think today it's $199, if I remember right. Let's compare this real quick to a Warn VRX 4500S, because that's the one with a synthetic rope on it. That winch, when I looked today, is $491 on Amazon. One of the things I pointed out in the last video was the previous Warn winch was made in the US. I looked at those new VRX winches. That's about the only thing I could find to compare this fiery red to from the Warn line. Now, on the previous video I said, you know, the Warn winch was made in the USA. The current VRX series winches appeared not to be made in the US. They're Chinese made. So that kind of takes that argument out of it some. If you want to compare a US owned company or whatever, that's fine. That's a fair argument. But both winches are made in China. I think Warn does have a 4,500 pound winch that is made in the US, but I think it's about 650 plus bucks from what I've seen. Don't quote me on that. Just kind of glancing around, I just thought I'd look real quick to see how these compare to a Warn winch. Now, let me say one thing. I do have, I think it's a 4,500 pound. It might be a 3,500, but I'm pretty sure it's a 4,500 pound Warn winch on our Can-Am side-by-side. I'm not a fan of that particular winch. That thing, the engage, disengage for the clutch so you can freewheel the cable in and out, is terrible on that winch. I'm constantly fighting with that thing. This surprisingly has a very nice clutch setup on it. It's nice and smooth. It's not hard to turn. When it clicks into position, it's very positive. But that one that's on my Can-Am, that thing is a bear sometimes to get it turned. A couple times I thought I was going to break the plastic wheel trying to release that thing. So far, this winch has gave me no issue like that. It's nice, it's buttery smooth on that that clutch control. So that's something I really like about this winch. So price point wise, you know, this is under half the price of the Warn winch, the VRX 4500S. So value wise, I think this winch is probably a very good value. Again, if you buy one, would like to remind you to run that rope all the way out and see how it's attached to the drum. That's really was my biggest complaint, besides the bolts being too short. So I don't know what size bolts those are. I'd say they're, I don't know, metric bolts. I never can. Maybe they're M8s. I don't know. So if you get one, prepare to buy a little bit longer bolt than what came, unless they fix it in the packaging. Just prepare to buy a little bit longer bolt and pull that rope out and check how it's attached to the drum. Those are my two biggest things. The switch is completely serviceable. I just preferred the switch that I already had on the machine. So with that, I want to give this winch, you know, before I probably would have gave it about a 1 thumbs up. Today I'd give it a 2 thumbs up. After using the heck out of it, I've been pretty impressed with this winch. So hopefully that keeps up in the future. If it gives me any problems in the future, I'll let you know. But for now, I would say, yeah, this is a pretty good value for under 200 bucks for a 4,500 pound winch. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys on the next video. And by the way, it's cold out here, the wind's blowing, and I forgot my gloves. Okay, have a good one. Here go, bro. Here go, bro.